Welcome, endurance enthusiasts. I'm your host, Bruna.
And I'm your host, Fabi. You're tuning into Human Endurance, the podcast where we aim to inspire you with stories of achievement, motivation, and self fulfillment.
We'll connect you with humans pushing boundaries, breaking barriers, and discovering the joy of endurance sports.
Join us on this journey of self reflection and personal growth. Let's go the distance together.
All right. Welcome, Martin, to Human Endurance. So happy you're here today.
Thank you for having me, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion we're about to have.
Also, same here. So let's kick it off. Can you please introduce yourself to the listeners? Who you are? What is it that you do?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name is Martin Kumm. I'm originally from Estonia, but living since already 13 years in Basel, Switzerland. And being a lifelong athlete myself, worked as a basketball player from youth, worked up to national level, and then decided one day that it's enough. It's time to move on to something more fun, and found triathlon, which very soon became very, very dear to my heart. But I liked one discipline more than the others. So the swimming and the running part were always a little bit questionable for me, especially coming from a background who never swam before. I can relate to how difficult it is in this discipline to actually get really good at. So I naturally transitioned over to cycling, and this is basically the sport I've been stuck in since then. And 2013, I went to or graduated in Bournemouth, UK, to become a sports chiropractor. And since then, working in clinic and working with athletes and different levels.
Awesome. And we know you also work with EF Education-EasyPost. So that's a professional cycling team, correct?
Correct. So this is a WorldTour team, and that's then basically in cycling terms, it means the highest level of competition you can have in this sports. I've been with them now past 5 years, and before that, I worked many years in ice hockey in Switzerland, also with the national team, the Estonian national team, for example. So, and then quite a few years also part of a track and field team in Switzerland. Traveled with them in the races and camps. So I have quite a different background in terms of working and seeing very many high-level athletes from different subgroups. And I think we're going to also touch a few of these key points on different ends of the spectrum, because we're talking more about endurance, and on the other side, there's quite a bit also to learn from track and field, who are the fast guys, fast girls, and everything needs to be fast. So it's a fast experience, and I'm quite, actually, I have to say now when I look always back to it, quite honored to have had these opportunities to work with such a great athletes.
Yeah, that must be super interesting. So, talking about endurance athletes, well, mostly runners and cyclists, but also swimmers, what are the biggest problems you see in your field when it comes to those type of athletes?
When we talk mostly about, let's say, running and cycling, and also obviously we can bring in the swimming mostly being then the shoulders, being the case, and then quite a bit also the neck issues sometimes being the problematic area. But cycling and running, these are the two events I'm most connected at the moment. For example, cycling, then we would have the knee, lower back quite often. And again, here we have to then divide if it's a chronic injury or acute injury. And we don't have to go into difference of the mechanisms and what's the difference between them. But would be the acute injury would be if you crash, and obviously there is an impact and there is an injury happening there. Versus chronic injuries when you do a repetitive movement over many times. For example, a cycling going with the pedals up and down. Also, running is a repetitive sport with a strike on the ground, landing forces, and then the forces have to go back in the body and absorbed somewhere. So, for example, running, it would be for a cycling, it would be very often the knee problem or the lower back problem then. And cycling acute injury often is a clavicle fracture, for example. That's what we see quite a few times a year within the team. Like you have a crash, you land on the shoulder, it's an impact. And also sometimes it happens in the long distances and distance triathlons when you crash on the bike, and there's not much to do when the shoulder goes on the ground then. And the chronic repetitive injuries for running, can be overuse injuries like stress fractures, Achilles problems quite often, plantar fasciitis quite often, and less so, but also sometimes I see issues with the lower back, but mainly the contact related points, then the foot and the knee that gets the beating then.
Mm. I think I'm very interested in learning more about those chronic problems, because those are the ones that it almost feels sometimes, unfair that you get those because you feel like you've done everything right. Because of a crash, it's like it's very causal, you know that you crashed, you have an injury, but if those chronic things, it's sometimes not that straightforward. So yeah, I'm curious, now going to cycling, because for me cycling is always the least, actually swimming is the least impact, but cycling is also low impact on the body. So I wonder how it can happen that somebody will get to knee problems. Where do the causes lie? Is it lack of, bike fit? Is it position? Is it cleats? What is it?
That's a great loaded question, and I can take the answer, I think, in any direction, and we will find something to discuss about. But in all seriousness, let's say the truth is somewhere in the middle. So, like, if there is something more specific you wanna dive in, I'm happy to kind of take that route and then be more specific. But just to give you a starter, like when we talk about cycling and the repetitiveness of the movement, it's because your foot is basically fixed onto something, and your buttocks or your hips are basically fixed into a saddle. Of course, you can move up and down a bit on the sideways, but it's limited. And then your hands are fixed onto a handlebar. Again, yes, you can move them, but the dimensions you are moving on are very small. So the moment you are fixed into something, being this bicycle and then the cleat and then the pedal, that means how the body works is that you have to find a way how to make this movement happen, right? And then often what you have is you have either one side, mostly around one side, you have imbalances, and that's totally normal. Everybody have, like the best athletes I've ever worked with, they have different imbalances, asymmetries, and that's totally normal and that's fine. What is not fine at some point when your body cannot handle anymore these imbalances, and that's often when the problems or the pain comes up and starts. And the model, like the theoretical model behind that, is very simple. It's you have the load, you have the capacity, and then when these are not matching, you will have injury or you don't have injury. So if you have too much load, too little capacity, and when I'm talking about capacity, I mean the tissue, so the ligaments, tendons, muscles, bones, they cannot handle that load you're training. Like on the bike, let's say the lateral outside of your knee, there's insertion of the ITB band. If it cannot handle that load that's going through, it's going to start create the inflammatory process, which then triggers a pain response, and you will start feeling the pain. But most often the pain didn't start 2 or 3 days before, or that day when you started to feel. That pain actually has been there since long time. It's just your brain is so clever machine that it will find a way to compensate as long as it's possible. And at one point when it's not possible, it starts to break down a bit and a bit and a bit until the point that the tissue actually gets damaged.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Maybe you can share more about how an average athlete can make sure or prevent to have such issues. Like, what would you recommend somebody buying a bike, wanting to start cycling more intensely, following training? How can they avoid getting injured chronically on the bike?
There, unfortunately, we don't have one size fits all solution, because it comes mainly down to our human bodies or our body's uniqueness. Like, we have all the basic structures. Most of us have the same. We have our hips that have the similar structures, similar anatomical shapes, and then also there is also big variabilities. We have our feet, knees, hips, lower back, shoulders, and so. But what is different is that we all have a little bit different genetic makeups that already makes a difference how your body can handle load and how it can recover and how fast it can recover. But also what is very interesting that's not talked a lot is like when you go back to childhood and how your childhood has been when you develop, and how much you've been exposed to different environments and different situations physically, then also the body already adapts from this time. So the concept, one of the part of the concepts I use is that it's developed from babies, basically. So what happens it's like a domino effect. Like a baby cannot develop into movement patterns when they don't have one thing basically done before. So let's say the baby cannot go in a crawling position before they can start turning a bit on one side to the other side. So they need these structures, and that's basically a strength training in different positions. And now you can take this in many, many, many years forward. Let's say you're in your late 30s, 30s into 40s, where all these compensation patterns that your brain developed early on are now being exaggerated and getting basically built on. So when you are now riding or running, you are basically taking all that with you, or lack of that with you, and some of the aspects will not then work as well. Let's say your hip is in a cycling position, you're on the bikes, on the hood, you either have enough flexion, extension, meaning how much you can bend forward and upright. So you either have that hip flexion or extension, or you don't have. And that's often, like if you're talking about lower back injuries, is important how the load travels into the spine. Like, so if you don't have that hip mobility, but you still want to be in a TT position on a time trial bike, you have to compensate somewhere else, right? And at some point, it's going to be most likely the lower back or the knee where the load is going to go. And then the sensitivity starts either in the knee or in the lower back. So I know I took it now a bit like very, very early on the stages of baby development to the high level sports. But I see often, like also my son is now 7-year-old, and I see things with his foot development on the left-hand side, which I know I saw already when he was 2 months old, and it's still carrying on until he's now, because I haven't done manually a lot. I wanted to let him kind of develop and see how this goes as a bit of experiment. We will never tell him that he was experienced, but it develops really from these ages onwards. And if you don't take care of these things when they are the kids, you will pay for that later on when you want to really push hard and develop as athlete.
I see. So what you're saying is, well, all of us will have imbalances. That's very normal. And then if we don't do anything to counter them, it might become a problem. It might. Like, it's not necessarily that it will become a problem, but depending on your goals and your position on the bike and what kind of imbalance you have, you might have a problem, and then you have to work on it. I have a question for you. I have heard people say that, when they were just running, they would get much more injured than when they started doing triathlon. And, sometimes these people are running just as much volume, but they have then added more of other sports, other stimulus. They say they are getting less injured. Is this generally true? And if so, could you explain the reasons behind it?
I love this direction, and this is a really good observation you have made there. And that's very similar what I've seen over the years too, is that the athletes who have been exposed to different sports have much more robustness also later in their careers. And the athletes who were very young, already very good, they are very good at one thing or one or few things, but they cannot do anything else, and then the body starts to break down. So again, I can take a very good cycling example here, and I will bring it back to your running example, what you said too. But like, for example, in cycling, like I can ask a rider stand on one foot, and I can tell if that cyclist has done any other sports besides riding their bicycle since they are the kid.
How
Really, it's sad, but it's true. But they can be the best riders in the world. But if you put them on one foot and they cannot balance there, you know that they have not done much when they were kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll
And
test that.
With somebody.
Random people on the street. No, from the cycling group. Can you please stand?
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because essentially, like a walking movement is a one leg movement. Running is a one leg movement. So you have to be able to stand first on one foot as a static position. Like if you can't stand on as a static position on one foot, then the running itself already becomes a one compensation pattern after the other, because the brain is trying to figure out as it goes along how to survive this next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and so on. So when a runner picks up different sports, the body is exposed to different environments, different challenges, different inputs. And then what the brain has to do, it has to start working, it has to start learning. Because the brain is incredible about learning new things if you put it in the environment. And the environment is not too challenging. If it's not too fast. If it's too fast, it will break down, it will fall, and it cannot handle it. But if you do this slowly and give enough repetition and time, the brain will adapt to most things. It can adapt. It can find new ways. Even if you are in your 50s and 60s, you can pick up new activities. It's going to be much harder when you are 10 compared to when you are a 10-year-old to pick up something new when you are in your 40s or 50s, but it's possible.
Hey guys, you followed our story. We're athletes and coaches completely fascinated by endurance. And now we're taking the leap, doing the scariest, most exciting thing we've ever done, and building our own company, Algo. It's the coaching technology we always wish we had, AI that empowers the coach instead of replacing them. If you want to support us, look up Algo Training, create an account, and tell us what you think. It would mean the world to us. Our website's linked on the show notes. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I have to ask now because you mentioned swimming is hard, and I'm also haven't been swimming as a child, so for me it's also hard, and I'm not really progressing as I do in the other sports. It's not linear. So how do you then see that with swimming? Because it's so technical, right? How do you see that people that are older are just not as good, and who maybe has a better ability as an older adult to get into swimming? What kind of athletes?
First of all, from my experience myself, like there is something to do with the floatingness in body or in the water, and this is something I think you cannot train. I think your body either have that floating, like I think it's called the buoyance or something like this is the English word for it. And yes, you can spend hours and hours in the pool. You can get pretty good. But if you don't have that one thing that your bones can actually float and you are really like just naturally in the water, you don't come as far as anybody, the person who has it. I think that's my first observation for myself, because I put a lot of effort in and my legs were just so heavy. They were like anchor in the sand all the time. Yeah. But once I get out of the water, I go even like cycling or even the running, I was there, right? So it's not the effort always, it's also what you have been given, right? And then you have to work what you have given. And the second thing obviously is the feeling for the water. And this again, as a kid, when you spend times when you were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in the pool for, I don't know, even if it's 2, 3, 4 hours in the pool, as an adult, you will never develop that. Like most of us will never. There is always going to be outliers. There's this 1 or 0.5% who have that capability of doing that because of the neurological capabilities they have. But most of us will not pick up that sensation to be in the water that efficient, that you're not spending all the energy moving forward. Or actually, for me, it was always just being able to stay on the water rather than going like a boat in the water. So these, I think, are the couple of things you cannot train. And then once you have a good training program, I think you can train yourself to a certain level, especially like for a longer distances. For Olympic distance, it's gone. It's gone. You once you haven't been in the pool since baby, it's basically gone already after that.
Yeah, I agree. So kind of still try swimmers who listen to improve. But
I mean, it's possible.
Absolutely. The message was not that. The message was that if you put in your effort, there's always going to be you can get quite far. And there's quite a few examples also in amateur ranks and also in the pros who have gone from amateurs to pro in long distances. And they are exceptional and doing a really good job. So for sure. And at the end of the day, it's also like, it has to be fun. And if you're enjoying that, figuring things out, it's a great sport and it's a great activity to do. And you mentioned yourself, it's a very low impact sport. So it's a great way of staying fit, moving around, moving actually in the water that has a different gravity sensation than in the air. So it's a beautiful thing. It's great, and never give up on swimming. That was not the message.
Keep pushing, but
maybe you can be the 0.5% that actually gets very, very good. But
Absolutely. And there's
and
only one way to find it out is to try, right?
exactly. Let's switch the message around. Cool. Okay, so now we wanna go through a list of like classic questions that athletes have. Actually, regardless of being beginner or more advanced, I feel like this comes back and back again. And I also personally feel like the science is not so straightforward with these. So I'm very curious on your opinion from what you've seen. So let's go through them one by one.
All right,
So
let's do it.
let's so put your, sports scientist, chiropractor hat on, and tell us. So warm up, does it really matter? And does it help prevent injury or not really?
And maybe to add on also, how do you warm up? Because there's different ways, right? It's just easy, like let's say you do a easy bike or easy jog, and then also stretching, dynamic stretching versus static stretching, etc.
Yeah. This is a very open topic, and I don't think there is right and wrong answer to that. What I have seen over the years is that I worked with track and field sprinters, as I mentioned before earlier, and their warm up is longer than their actual session. Yeah. So because their event is so specific, let's say the plan is to run 6 times 60 meters. That's the whole thing. Basically, they are doing the whole session. Yeah. But these 6 times, or let's say 4 times 60 meters, they're gonna get 110% out of their system. There's nothing neurologically can be left in the tank. So their warm up to get to that point is sometimes hour and a half, 2 hours before they can get to that point. Yeah. So there is this stretching, activation, all these steps. So there it's long, but once they are there, it's full gas, and then they are done. There's nothing they can do afterwards. Like the session maybe is long, but the actual work was maybe 10 minutes. Yeah. And then you have the other extreme of endurance athletes. Let's take a cyclist going out 3-hour bike ride. It's just endurance ride, don't do ride. You take your bike, you go. There's literally nothing most of us would do anything before going out on the ride. Maybe take a coffee, if that. That's your warm up. Right? So where is the right and wrong answer? So it really depends, and I think it comes down to what you want to achieve with that session. Like also when you go out on a bike and you want to do a VO2 max session, or you have an hour and a half intense workout, and you have, let's say, an hour or 2 hours to get this done, you already need to be ready before you start the ride. Yeah? So you should have some sort of a warm up routine before. Or we do nowadays a lot indoors, where a lot of things are done. Like you have 60 minutes, you have 5 intervals there, you do pyramids, something is like all the time, basically you are on the bike, there's a program. Yeah. So realistically, like you take certain period of time cardiovascularly to get to that point that you can actually push that VO2 sessions. You can't go there and within the next first 20, 30 minutes. Or I can give you an example, like we have these short prologues in WorldTour, which is like, I don't know, 5 to 7 or 8 minutes. The warm up is still an hour almost, or 50 minutes, but it's mega intense. So the time they go to the start line, they are ready. Like they are so ready that the system can only do maybe that 6-7 minute effort before they are done. Yeah. So it's again cycling, but it's a different approach because you know what you want to achieve. For us amateurs, I think we should most of the time have some sort of activation routine before we start the session, especially if it's a harder session that you have on the plan.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so we can learn something from the sprinters. Whenever we're going out for something a little harder, it's probably worth to warm up, especially if it's cold.
Yeah, and I would add here one thing, like this, when you're talking about running, I really like the running warm-ups where you have jumps and hops and boggles in there before you start actually your running session. So it doesn't have to be drop jumps, it doesn't have to be anything, but just something that kind of elastically warms up the system. You have your eccentric loading, you have your concentric loading, you have everything kind of mixed up to different directions. So your brain is also ready, because the brain needs the information from the feet. And when the brain is already ready, your run is also going to be much more stable. You're going to be much better on the feet. And as we spoke before, running essentially is a one leg activity. When the more stable you are on one leg, the better your running quality and efficiency, and then also the outcome will be.
Okay, makes sense. Um, Now let's go to stretching. We already talked about it a bit, but how and when do you advise stretching? Now, um, talking about running and cycling mostly. Actually, swimming, I would like to hear as well because there it's also important. What kind of stretches do you advise? Because for me personally, I rarely stretch, and I know it's very important. The only time I stretch is when I feel some niggle, and then I stress stretch, so I stretch a lot to get rid of it. So maybe you can elaborate a bit on
Yeah.
what your opinion on stretching.
Yeah, I honestly think your example is 95% of us. Like if everything is kind of like quiet, then why should you do anything extra? Because things are done, right? And I'm more or less most of the time there also. And I think it, first of all, it comes down also the how your body handles the training load generally. And like I've historically been in a way that my body can take a lot, and I don't have to take a lot care of it before it's something comes up. And like from stretching point of view, it can be one or the other. And the simplest answer, what I've seen over the years here, is that there is athlete that should stretch and there's athlete who should not stretch. And often it comes down to your genetic makeups, meaning like how your flexibility and your general mobility, right? So if an athlete is already very, very mobile, meaning you can take your hip and put behind your neck, basically your foot, you're relatively flexible to be able to do that. So I see Bruna is now thinking about, can I do that?
Behind my head. Oh, well, how do I do that? So,
You can try afterwards, and then. But in all seriousness, like when you have a lot of mobility, I think the stretching is not going to be a solution for you in long term in terms of performance. You need more stability there, because the joints need stability, and the stability comes then from the muscles around the joints. Whereas you have athletes who might be quite stiff, generally speaking. These athletes need to stretch, and they need to stay mobile. I wouldn't, because for me stretching is a static movement. I would use a mobility exercises that are more including a movement, because they have much higher neurological demand also for the brain, meaning it activates not just the muscle, it activates the joint, but it also activates the neural pathway to the brain and back down to the muscle. So if it's possible, I would always add a movement into a stretching routine rather than just holding for 30, 40 seconds one position. Having said that, sometimes very early on in the rehab process, I would use certain static stretches just to start to elongate the tissue a little bit without putting any movement through it. So there is a time and place for everything, but generally speaking, add movement into your routine, either it's before or after or during or like also for swimming, like to get the upper thoracics moving. I mean, you can stretch your pecs as much as you want, but if you don't put that spine through movement, meaning you don't add the rotation in as a mobility exercise, you don't do much to the spine, and the spine is then not ready to rotate, which means the shoulder blades cannot rotate and then be on the chest. So it kind of comes down to again, everything is linked together a bit. And the moment you're like, if you're going down that road, like the moment that upper thoracics is very stiff for swimming part, your lower back has to compensate for that. So your lower back is going to be much more tighter from that part. So it kind of like one question, but actually it brings quite a few things together.
yeah, the body's so complex, right? But how about like depending on the event of somebody? So if they're doing, a short course triathlon, or if they're a sprinter versus a long distance runner, or even, a sprinter in the pool versus an endurance swimmer, does it change the recommendation at all? Like, should you be more stretchy and mobile for one of those kinds of events? Does it change at all?
I think it always changes. It always has a change. Like it's just question is how specific we want to be and how specific we need to be. Like for amateur athletes, the main thing is like, let's keep moving, let's keep progressing, let's find some small things to work, but it doesn't have to be always so nitty gritty as we see nowadays, either in social media or also sometimes from the coaching point of view. So we have to keep it quite simple. Like if we're talking high performance, I think it makes a huge difference. And we can take it in many directions. It can be like, does it make an impact directly on the event the person is doing right now, or it makes an impact how that person is less likely going to get injured? meaning they're going to have a longer time of consistency. They can train longer, so they're going to actually improve from that. So most of the injury and the performance parts, it always comes down to the consistency question, like how long you can stay how long you can stay injury free, and then from there, if you stay long enough injury free, you're gonna get better. No questions asked. You're gonna get better.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, then third one of the classics, cool down. Is it worth the time or overrated?
Short answer, likelihood, very small impact, if anything. Having said that, you see after the stages in Tour de France or any big races, you see riders going on a turbo trainers, and you ask yourself, like, they just spent 4 hours going full gas on the climb. They have destroyed everything they have. They're given everything, but they still, in like 10 minutes after the finish, they are on the rollers. In this case, it makes a difference, I think. This is, again, this 5 to 10%. It helps to reduce the soreness, and we have quite nice studies there, so it makes a difference. Does the amateur have to, like, if you have to choose spending 30 minutes stretching afterwards versus you get that training session done and you get to sleep 30 minutes or 20 minutes earlier next day or that evening, what would I recommend? I would say take the sleep, because you will probably have a much bigger positive impact from that sleeping, extra hours or extra minutes of sleep, even if that's the case, versus doing a 10-minute cool down or stretching routine at the end.
Yeah, very good point. And on the riders, right? I guess they do that to flush out a bit of lactate in their legs, so they're right.
Correct.
But yeah, never have done that post race cool down. Only for the professionals. So next topic I want to get to is strength training. I'm very curious to hear your opinion on that, because that's also, especially for triathletes, I know it's very important, but obviously conscious of the time that you put into the other disciplines. How important do you see strength training? And maybe you could also answer me these questions. Would you even sometimes skip a session of one of the three disciplines in triathlon for a strength session, or would you always prioritize the session for triathlon?
That's a very good question there. That's a really, really good question. The short answer would be, it really depends on the specifics of the event again, and the timing of the event. But like we see nowadays from the research that the strength training is becoming very, very important, especially like one thing is the performance itself, but the other part being the injury prevention. Would I specifically leave out I don't know, let's say a 2-hour cardio session versus a gym session? As an athlete in me, probably not. But what I would most likely do is spend that 20, 30 minutes then doing one or two very specific exercises, then either that being then some jumps or some strength work, really like lifting one or two weights. That could be an option, but I wouldn't then really like. But if you are more in the injury side, then probably I would say, okay, let's focus more on the strength part now, because that most likely will give you more gains versus you spending 2 hours on the bike or running. So it depends. But in generally speaking, when we can have that strength component involved in the long run in the programs, the likelihood that it will help is actually bigger than doing just 1 or 2 sessions, but let's say within a few months. And that's also something that has now changed quite a bit in pro cycling, is that we used to think, okay, we're going to do the off season, so we do a couple of months of strength work. But then what we see is that the riders come to the events, let's say they come to a Tour de France, and then after 10 days, because the most other volume, the cycling volume is so big, there's nothing else happening. So the body automatically starts to kind of loosen up, if I may say though. So the strength component goes so far, so quickly down actually. But the hard part is that we can't do any strength work during the tours. It's not impossible. The riders are full on 3 weeks. If you ask me how they do it, I don't know. I would not be able to do that. It's incredible. One thing is the riding part, but the other thing is that like 3 weeks, your life is like from the minute, basically it's just dictated. Like from the morning to the evening, there is no time, and you're constantly getting fatigued, and you have every time something coming up. There is no race, nothing is like the pain is kind of a part of it. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's accepted, right?
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly difficult situation to be in, but somehow these guys, they make it, and that, funny enough, most of them actually enjoy it, and they are very proud and happy to do that, and again and again. I wouldn't, but I'm happy to be on the other side and work with them. So it's all good. So strength part, very important. We should work with it, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be long sessions, and consistency here is also better than 2 months a lot.
Yeah, what I've come to realize personally is that, doing a strength session of 1 hour is such a big commitment from a really busy day of a lot of other things that I prefer to do, like running. But then doing, a set of 3 exercises that takes me 15 minutes, that's much easier. And it gets me doing it overall a lot more strength than if I would have to do 1 hour. So that's something that I'm trying to push more with my athletes too, because then, like you said, consistency is everything. And I think in strength training, it's the same.
Absolutely. And I love the word that what you use there, is that you actually are doing it, because your brain is not finding ways out, and it's not finding excuses, because it's like, first of all, you create the habit, and once you have the habit fixed, it's much easier to work with anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. Second to last question of the classics. Magnesium and supplement for recovery. Is there anything here that's worth it, or is it mostly noise?
I'm also curious to hear about creatine.
Yeah. So the supplement industry is an interesting industry. And I know a little bit more about it because my wife is a FTN, so functional nutritionist. So she works quite a bit in that regard. So you can imagine our dinner table conversations at times, where I'm the one who's listening mainly. But it's one of those fields that is almost non-regulated. So you can have really a high substance, high quality product on a market on the same shelf as the product that literally has nothing valuable in it and just filled with fillers, right? And that's sad, because this is one of those businesses. If you put a lot of money in and you do a good marketing campaign, people will buy it. It's basically one-on-one, right? And once this, like, coming back to magnesium, I think magnesium is very important, especially for athletes and also for normal people. And oftentimes, like when we do a laboratory testing, blood testing, is that you, like 99% of us, the magnesium levels are always fine. Like what I hear from her is that we very rarely see problems with magnesium levels on blood tests, because it's a static test. It's a snapshot of one moment, but it's not functional. So when you do some of the functional tests, you will actually see that there is quite a bit of discrepancies. And then magnesium, there is differences of the quality of the magnesium, and it can be really, really big. So all the big brands oftentimes have a lot of fillers in there. That means the absorbability then becomes a problem, right? You might take 500 milligrams worth of product, but what you actually absorb from there is much, much, much less. And then it becomes a question like, yes, the value shows on a blood picture, okay, but the reality is that it's not okay. You should be taking much more. You are taking less in, and what you are taking in is not absorbing. Yeah. So you actually, like, you're doing something, but you're actually not, because whatever you're taking in is not being used or is not available to be used. So there, I think the quality and the high quality comes really, really is very important, especially for athletes, and the absorbability question.
I was just curious, like as a consumer, is there anything you've learned from your wife, or maybe you learned at this point? How can I know which product actually is high quality and which one is not?
There are, like, I would say probably all the big brands. If it's a big brand, it's probably going to be some shape and form that the availability is reduced. I'm not going to be able to give you companies, because I know that she has a couple, which she really uses, and they are really, that's what I have to take too. I'm forced to take two. So there is a couple of brands that really work well, and there are also different subtypes that work in different times and different aspects of the human body differently. But I wouldn't be able to give you a couple of names right on top of my head.
I'm going to the last one of the classics. So, what are your thoughts on ice, cold plunges, and also sauna?
Can I come back to that question? Because there is on the supplement part, I was thinking about bringing in something that is not very
Yeah.
often looked and talked about. And
Yeah.
because we are talking about human performance and human endurance, and that also incorporates or includes general health. One of the things that I see also from the team and what I've been using now recently in the clinic quite a bit is omega-3 testing. And the value there is actually what we see is that on an immune system, it gives you a lot of inputs that you don't get with any other testing.
Hmm.
Yeah. And they also claim like values and the benefits on certain injury recovery. And there, I'm not so sure. But on the immune system part, I'm 100% convinced that it has a big impact.
Hmm.
And one of the tests that we use in clinic is from Omega Quant, and the team also I think uses the same brand. They are really like there's a couple of different ways you can test it, and you get different indexes, different values, and then from there you can then supplement the different types of omegas what you need to use. But bringing it like back to performance point of view is like when you have a good immune system, you're gonna stay healthy again longer. The longer you stay healthy, you can train again, and the longer you can train, obviously, it goes back to what we just said a few minutes before, right? So indirectly, it has a very big impact on how much you can absorb and train the volume.
Good one, omega-3. And you didn't go into creatine? Are you a believer or are you thinking?
And I think the recent research is really pointing in direction that there is something in it, and more in it than we initially thought when it came on the market as a bodybuilding substance. And we see the research that it has an impact on the brain function, cognitive function, and it also has potentially effects on the endurance part. I think I personally take it every day. I think we don't need to cycle it. We don't need to build in, build out. We don't have to do much of that. There is a certain quantity, and if you keep on top of that, I think it has benefits. I haven't seen any like water gains. Last year when I was preparing for the Le Top, so that's the biggest amateur stage race, or like a top race, I managed to lose quite a lot of weight still on it and taking it. So I don't think it was withholding any fluids on my case. Obviously, I've heard there is some potential cases that it might work differently. So it is a bit individual also then in this regards. But generally speaking, I think it's worth to try, especially considering how cheap it is.
Yeah.
How many grams do you take?
I am probably around 6 to 10, depending how much I need my brain to fire. Today I had 10.
I also started taking it again, and I'm around 8 to 10 as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
One of our friends is almost like a creatine influencer, I would call him. But he's always telling everybody to take creatine.
Okay, omega-3, creatine, nothing else. Great. So then we go back to sauna, cold plunges. So cold exposure, heat exposure. What is your opinion on those mechanisms?
Again, it's one of those things that really I think came on the market as a great product, if we can call it a product. And for sure, it has its impacts. But shortly said, I think like if you want to have a good next day session, then probably a cold plunge or an intermediate cold immersion or however it's called, different names, same thing. It has a short-term effect of probably you feeling better for next day. If you're looking for a long-term effect, the science is a bit muggy and probably not in a favor of a long-term effect, especially for endurance athletes. And also the other part, when I was working with track and field athletes, I saw like they love to go, because we work mostly in the warmer temperatures. So they love to go in the cold and then spend time in the cold pools. And and also with ice hockey, they used a lot. But the science is quite clear. Like it has an impact on an endocrine system, and has a dampening effect on the protein resynthesis, especially directly after a impact. So meaning either strength training or a hard session. So if you want to have a short effect, feel good in a hot environment, probably makes sense. If you're looking for a long-term performance gain, less likely to have anything from it. Yeah.
It can hinder strength training gains, right? That's what I've heard.
Yeah. That's what the science is telling. And I remember probably 5-6 years ago already, I had a very good discussion with one of the guys who was behind the papers, and then he explained the same thing, that there seems to be, and it makes like in a black and white world, it makes sense that it has to have some sort of dampening effect. Obviously, you get the revascularization afterwards when the capillary is open again, but most likely the initial impact when the capillaries and everything, the whole system is dampened down, is bigger than the reopening effect afterwards. And then if you take the other extreme is the warmth and the sauna, and then the heat exposure that is really popular now. Their current research is quite favorable, especially when you want to prolong your cardiovascular effect, what we don't see in the cold plunges or cold immersions at all, any cardiovascular effect. So if you need to use, and if you want to use something, then probably you will get more out of a heat training than from the cold training.
So, okay, what I understand is then from the cold plunge, I guess if you've had a hard session and you know you're going to get sore and the next day you need to perform, maybe you're a stage race, right? Then it could be worth it. But for
Absolutely.
your long-term gains, it's probably not the best bet. Yeah.
Got
Sad
it.
here, Fabio and I have a little cold plunge. We got it when the research was totally positive, and now things have switched.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you like the sensation, then I think for us amateurs, the effect, the few percent here and there, I don't think it's not gonna make a big difference on your race day. But if you like the cold environment, especially on a hot day, go for it and have fun and enjoy it.
Fair enough.
So let's move to the topic of foot mechanics. So you're very into foot mechanics. Can you explain what foot mechanics mean exactly to the listeners, and especially in the context of cycling, and why do you think it's underexplored?
Yes, this is a different full episode on its own. But to try to keep it short, it's like, as we mentioned earlier, every movement you do on the ground, most of the time you're going to be on one foot on the ground. So when the foot hits the ground, you're going to have a contact mostly with the big toe. You will have then a contact with the pronation, so the foot moving inwards, and then the heel needs to follow inwards, the knee needs to rotate inwards, and the hip and everything follows from there. And we often obsessed, or especially like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we obsessed about pronation being a bad thing, and the foot shouldn't be moving inwards, and it should be fixed in a position where it's stiff, and then we have a stable base for the push-off phase of the running. But I mean, also theoretically, this doesn't make sense, because any movement requires a muscle activation, and you can't activate muscles when something is not moving. So you need to have some sort of a movement. Something needs to happen that other muscles can also react and absorb. So the difference between a running and a cycling is quite a big. Like when in cycling, you are basically, the foot is locked into a shoe, a carbon shoe that is stiff, pretty much the same sensation as you would be standing on a concrete floor, right? So we put that foot into that shoe that is a concrete, and we want that foot still basically be stiff and stable in that environment, so it wouldn't move. So we ask the foot to absorb, but we don't really give it a chance to propel that force. Whereas running, you first ask the foot to absorb, meaning kind of do all this collapsing and what we said before, and then it also has to recoil and give you that force that you move forward. So it's absorb and explode. On the running, it's basically just absorb and nothing else happens. So in simple terms, that's the biggest difference. And now, obviously, what we see in cycling, in my opinion, and it goes also back what we said before, is that if you ask the cyclist to stand on one foot, then they basically can't, and they fall over, because there's nothing really happening in the foot. If you spend 6-7 hours a day in that shoe being compressed, first of all, the foot itself will deform into positions of that shoe shape, which is not anatomical, and that's also not functional. And then you take it out, and you expect when you walk that this foot will do the job it's designed to do. It's like you already see it's not possible. It's like trying to put a round structure in a square environment. And that's where a lot of the knee injuries I see in cycling stem from, is actually from the foot. Yeah. And then when we bring it back to running, for example, it's a great sport because you have all these dynamics from the foot to the knee to the hip and lower back. It's just the question is where in the system something starts to break down. Because as we said also before, everybody of us will have some sort of imbalance and disbalance somewhere in the system. So let's say if you have a nicely functioning foot, then the question or the likelihood is very small that your knee or the hip will be problematic at some point. But at some point, like because of, again, either the neurological development we spoke earlier from the babies to here, there is going to be some sort of deformity in the foot because, again, we use the shoes in certain shapes, then the foot absorbs and becomes the shape in a normal shoe also. So there's going to be limitations how much that foot already is as a baseline is able to do. And when you run and the foot cannot, for example, if we bring it back to either Achilles or plantar fascia, these structures are not meant as static structures. They are actually there to also be part of that absorb and then explode mechanism. And if they are not in a position to absorb or explode, they will start obviously then becoming overused and overstretched, or there's going to start the injury process either then under the foot or around the heel on the top of it. So if you want to go a bit more like in specific directions, give me a bit of guidance here, or otherwise I can talk another hour of this.
I see. Yeah, these are very complex, right? I have two questions for you. So the first one is, I have heard, because I struggled with plantar fasciitis a few years ago. Actually, a few different times. I haven't had it the last 2 years, but well, I also had other injuries. But anyways, I've had some problems with my feet in the past, and then I did a bit of research, and I came across the whole topic around, hey, the drop in the shoe, and also how much room you have on your toe box and how important that is. Can you speak to those two things, shoe drop, or toe box, or maybe any other things that you think are relevant when people are coming across these kinds of injuries? What can they do to try and stay away from them?
Yeah, maybe also explain what plantar fasciitis exactly is, because I guess a lot of listeners don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point there. So the definition of a fasciitis would be that there is an inflammatory process going on somewhere along a fascia under the foot. Most often it's around the heel, where it has kind of like a short and then kind of a thicker part of the tendon or the attachment to the bone, and then it elongates throughout the foot, underneath the foot, basically to base of every single digit under the foot. And originally, it was thought that often the fasciitis problem starts from the heel spurs, or it starts from the hyperpronation of the foot, so basically the foot arch collapsing. But recently, we have seen, or we also thought that vice versa, that the pulling of the fascia will then create heel spurs, and because you already have a heel spur, it's going to be less likely that you will heal, or the healing process will be longer because you have the heel spur develop. But I think the research shows that this is not quite the case, and it's not as simple as that, that one causes the other and the other doesn't cause the other. So the inflammatory process is an overuse problem, but often it comes down to how the foot functions. And when you look at the running mechanics, is when the foot is at the back, when you're already getting ready to push off. And again, we can go this many directions, meaning like if you look at the mechanics at all first, a lot of us, the running techniques are widely different. So if I say, like, a lot of the people, even we don't have that push-off phase directly because the foot is in a different position already. So the push-off over the big toe, for example, cannot even happen. But let's say in a theoretical model it works. You have the push-off phase where the big toe is being elongated and it's getting ready to push off, and you're going to move forward ready for next stride. Then what we actually see is often is that the toes become very important, because the toes of the attachments of the fascia underneath here, when the toes curl too fast and too high, it's going to put pull on the fascia. And when it puts pull on the fascia, it starts pulling basically from the heel forward. So it becomes not the heel problem, it becomes a forefoot problem. It becomes a toe problem, and how fast the toes curl and how high the toes curl while you're pushing off in that phase. So that's why a lot of this, like the standard models that we work on the calf, or we work passively on the fascia itself, it doesn't work until you understand the mechanics, how we need that toe box in the shoe then to work. And if the toe box, for example, is very narrow and the foot is basically just fixed into that position, then the foot cannot almost elongate, then it's again cramped into that certain position. Obviously, other extreme is if you have too much movement and you're sliding around. So it needs to be a little bit of a compromise. And obviously nowadays we have the shoes that are on a carbon plate, high, exploding, doing a lot more what the foot is used to doing. And we're not going to go down there because that's going to take another time. So I would try to bring it back to the fascia. So one of the things for fascia is to look at the toes and the front foot mechanics.
So essentially, probably your shoes were too small
Not necessarily, right?
because there was not enough space, or they were too big and you kind of slided and you wanted to grab on with your toes.
It's very likely that none of them could have been the issue.
But
Most likely, it's how the foot on, like, already passively would be. Like when you walk, there's quite a big possibility then that actually the toe position is not anymore fully flat. There's a little bit of curling or crabbing sensation, or there's something in that forefoot mechanics. It doesn't necessarily have to be even to do with running. Because running is just putting extra load on it and then just accelerates the whole process.
can you do anything to change that? Because I do think that I curl a bit my toes more. I swear, I have thought of that before.
Yeah, and you don't surprise me there. So I would be very surprised if you would have said you have a very good stretching and a very wide toe box, and you can really keep your toes separately wide.
At all, just very tiny toes, but very crammed into each other.
We're not going to go details into Bruni's foot. I would happy to do that, but on a confidentiality issues, we're not going to do that. But you're not alone there, and that's exactly the picture you fit in. And what you need to do there is literally work with the feet and work with the forefoot, work with the toes, and work with the strengthening of the toes. Actually, this is the movement you're already doing well anyway, right? So I wouldn't strengthen the old pattern. I would need to see how we can get your toes actually separate and open up and be long instead of curling up.
I hate the pedicure.
But they give you the thing in between the toes, so you need to go to the
Perfect. That's it. That's it. When you learn how to run with that, you're going to make a miles leap forward.
Okay. Well, are you coming to Zurich anytime soon if you're available for a consultation?
Sure, let's make something up. Happy to come.
Go.
Cool. So we're getting to the end, sadly, but I would have so much more topics to talk about feet also when it comes to cycling. But that also gives the chance to do this another time, focusing more on that topic. But well, we always close the podcast with some advice for listeners. Going to the question, for the coaches that are listening, what is the one shift in how they think about injury prevention that will make the biggest difference?
This one is a good one, and I'll give it really short and sweet. I think here it doesn't become so important how you can prevent injuries per se, but it more becomes a question like how you can build a robust athlete and as robust athlete as possible. And when you have athletes who are well built, generally in 3Ds, 4Ds, they're going to go through the performance, the training, the load much more less likely to get injured than the athletes who are very narrowly focused on certain aspects of training and less, or even if they are only focusing on rehab and getting healthy or staying healthy. So give them a vast variety of activities, different challenges for the brain to work with, and the likelihood is much, much less.
Very good advice.
So cross triathlon is the answer, what I hear.
I didn't want to say it, but you put words in my mouth, so yes, that sounds like this.
I'll stick to running. Okay, and then for the athletes listening, yeah, what's one piece of advice that you give them to try and stay healthy in the long term?
Yeah. Injuries, again, don't happen overnight. It's a process. And the earlier you get onto that process, the less likely, again, you are that the injury gets that far that you need to take time off. Simple as that.
So keep in mind the stretching, mobility, doing things that can help you be a stronger, well-rounded athlete throughout your journey.
Yes, and also really trying to listen what your body is trying to tell you, because we are so good at just like, let's get this session done, it's going to be different or better tomorrow. And let's get this session in, it's going to be better tomorrow. But the signs are there, we're just not listening to that. And the earlier you start listening to these small signs, the less likely is that you're going to run into a concrete wall at some point later on. Yeah, because once you're at the wall and you're standing at the chiropractor or whoever, physiotherapy or whatever office or a doctor's office, their job is becoming then much more increasingly hard, because you still want to do what you want to do, but your body is not capable of doing what you want to do. And then you have somebody delivering you a message that you need to either take off or you need to start changing things around, which you're not prepared to do because you are locked into your goal. Yeah. So the earlier you listen to the smallest minds, the better you're off.
Yeah, I think that's a very good advice. And I'm sure lots of people listening know that they're not really doing that too often, right? I'm one of them too. It's hard to listen and be like, okay, now I take off. I have a red mark on my training calendar that I didn't do the workout, but it's fine. Great. So last question, Martin, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
I have two resources that I think are quite valuable. So the first one would be the homepage. I think there is quite a nice information there, generally speaking, around cycling, and a couple of nice blog posts about the tissues and the healing times and the overall idea, how the injuries happen, and also a couple of rehab points of views. I've also written for cyclists, I've written kind of like a knee booklet that you can then look through and do tests, and you can use the booklet also to write down the notes that what you received during the testing, and then I've given a couple of exercises that you can start working with. So it's quite like a nice overview and comprehensive starting point. And if there's obviously more questions, then you can reach out to me either in a message, or then Instagram is the second place where I'm quite active recently, and there I also share some of the background stories when I'm on the tour with the team. So these two probably would be the best ways to stay in touch with me.
Great.
Awesome.
Cool. Then thank you so much for joining. It was great chatting with you, and all the best.
Thank you very much. And I do feel that we covered actually a lot. So you girls did a great job. So thank you for having me. And I really enjoyed actually discussing things with you. So thank you.
A pleasure.
Cool.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Human Endurance. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you like the show, don't forget to rate it and hit the subscribe button whatever you're listening to it. This helps us to reach a bigger audience. Thank you and see you next time.